one of the things that I sort of highlighted the two main scenarios for class designer, and that is visualizing existing code, using it as a design tool for initial class design, perhaps even things such as documenting your code. One of the main goals that we had in this first version is to make sure that the diagrams that you do create remain relevant throughout the development cycle. And what I mean about that is, if I go out and create a diagram, I'm investing time in laying out shapes and so forth. But if I'm working in a team environment and there's a lot of code churn, code is changing, I don't want to be going back there and having to manually update my diagram all the time. We've really pushed the user model where the diagram is just a view of your code. So any changes that you make in the diagram are automatically reflected in code and vice versa. So that's always automatically done for you. And perhaps I'll give you a taste for what I mean with that behavior.
So what you're talking about is that you can completely go back and forth through reverse engineering on existing code. Somebody changes the diagram, you see the changes. Is that?
Indeed, and you'll see that I can start creating, modifying members or creating new classes, and that automatically generates code. But if I go into the code editor and start, editing the code from there, the diagram is automatically updated just to give me an actual view of, the recent code changes. So I'm back into that diagram that I started off before. And you can see over here on the left-hand side, I have a toolbox that I can actually start creating, classes, enums, interfaces. So it's easy for me just to create a new class by drag-dropping onto the design surface here. And let's say we call this new class person. Now, this is actually going to be a base class for the customer class. So I'm going to draw an inheritance line going from the customer class to the person class. I'm going to right-click on person class and give it a constructor here. And in actual fact, what I have over here, the derived class customer has a name field and a name property. It's probably a good idea to actually put that in the person base class. So I'm going to select those, cut the code from there, and put it in the person class over here. Now, I've been dragging a shape, drawing lines, manipulating members, and so forth. But if I right-click on this new shape and choose View Code, you can see that all of those edits that I've been making has actually just been generating source code files, generating code on the fly as I've been editing the diagram. Likewise, if I'm in the code editor and I add a new field, let's say a date time property called date of birth, and I go into the class diagram, you actually see that the diagram is synced to those changes. So the diagram is always a view of the code, and they're always in sync. So those are some of the editing features or the design features on Class Designer. Of course, we also have quite a few refactoring features, which are also neat, coming out in Visual Studio 2005. So for example, I just created a public field. Now usually what is common practice or best practice is to have a private field which backs a public property. So I can go ahead and just right-click that field here, choose from the refactor menu, choose encapsulate field, give a name for my new property, and hit OK. And I've now got a field which has actually turned and made that private, and now and also created a public property for me. Things like rename refactor is also available from the diagram itself. So, for example, if I rename this this address class to base address, and I hit enter, well, nothing's really changed on the diagram, and you'll notice that there were a lot of lines all pointing to this. You had classes that were derived from base address. You had some field which is of type address, but all the lines all stay the same. That's because the refactoring feature has gone out across the project and updated that address, that reference to address, to now base address. So that's a really cool thing, and you can actually see a visual way of the of what refactoring does on your project. And then there's other productivity features that we've placed in there, such as being able to automatically generate interface stubs easily from the diagram. When you're again designing your code.
So previously with Visual Studio, I've seen people, I've been on teams where we've done class design initially in Visio, and there are some tools that did like a one-time import into Visual Studio from Visio. What's the relationship now between this tool and then the Visio tool where you could go, can you import from Visio or go back and forth at all?
The really important thing to note about Class Designer here is that it's a direct abstraction over the code. If I'm working in a C# project, for example, the type of concepts that I deal with on the design surface are C# concepts such as fields, properties, protected, internal, access modifiers. If I'm working in a VB project instead, you see things such as modules that you can create. So that's a very direct relationship right onto the code. With Visio, with UML class diagrams, that is not always so. So being able to import things from Visio and not losing information, it's a fairly difficult thing to do. For Visio users, what they'll be able to do is, if they have a Visio class diagram, you can generate the code, and then with that code, you then create the visualization with Class Designer inside Visual Studio, and you're good to go.
So you can at least import the existing work that you've put into Visio and say, okay, well now I'm going to use the Visual Studio Class Designer because it's
Indeed.
really cool, and import it. And
right, and you have all the benefits of the continuous syncing and so forth.
very cool. Cool.
Yeah.
So